Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features Uncanny X-Men number 193, cover dated May 1985. Now this is a special double-sized issue. There's 40 pages of story inside, and as the cover caption indicates, Gala 100th anniversary issue of the all-new, all-different X-Men. So this is harking back to Giant Size X-Men number 1 and Uncanny X-Men numbers 94 and 95 specifically. The War Hunt two-parter storyline in which Thunderbird, John Proudstar, died. And so here on the cover we have the X-Men versus the Hellions, including James Proudstar, Thunderbird's younger brother, now wearing his costume and having taken over his name. So how did this scene come about? Well, we'll have to go inside the issue to discover it. Last thing to note here is the art on the cover is by John Romita Jr., inked by Dan Green. And I think that this cover would have worked well as a wraparound, but in this era we're not quite at the point of wraparound covers becoming more common. That would begin in earnest with New Mutant Special number 1. But I think this would have looked well as a wraparound. Anyway, let's open this one up to the splash page, and the story begins on Muir Isle with an X-Man that hadn't been seen in a while, and that's Sean Cassidy, Banshee, and he's doing his early morning 10-mile run around the perimeter of the island, keeping fit. He's a retired X-Man, and suddenly he is nailed by this figure here. The creative team is Chris Claremont writer, John Romita Jr. and Dan Green artists, so I always say that what's happening here is Romita Jr. is providing breakdowns and Dan Green finishing the art and inks. Tom Orzechowski letterer and Glynis Oliver colorist. The title of the story is War Hunt 2, and that is, as I said, a callback to the original War Hunt two-parter from issues 94 and 95 of the title, which were plotted by Dave Cockrum and Len Wein, and dialogue was provided by Chris Claremont, so he wasn't part of the he wasn't a plotter of those initial issues. So here we see Banshee getting his clock clean, so to speak, by James Proudstar. He thinks it's John Proudstar. It can't be you, I saw you die. And James replies in response, then I'm a ghost. Unless your precious teammates do precisely what I say, you'll be one too, as he knocks Banshee unconscious. And then this is an interesting transition because someone else emerges from an unconscious state, but it turns out to be Charles Xavier, who at the end of the previous issue was beaten almost to death, as it turned out, when leaving his position as an assistant professor at the University of Columbia, beaten by a group of anti-mutant young men. And it turns out that he was saved from death by being dragged off the street by a member of the Morlocks. And so here's Callisto there to greet Professor X when he comes to. And here he is in this bedroom in the Morlock tunnels. And Callisto's got him up in this bizarre S&M punk gear, which he exclaims in relation to, good grief, woman, what have you done to me? And indeed, like this belt around his head, it looks bizarre. But anyway, she explains that they saved his life after having what she, calls, ironically, a pretty rough night. And we get the explanation that the Morlock healer saved him from the brink of death. So she explains that here. Last night you were beaten nearly to death. One of my people found your body and dragged you underground. The healer restored you to a semblance of health. And Professor X asks, a semblance? Clinically, chum, you were croaked on arrival. She responds, the healer brought you back. Trouble is, he wasn't exactly in tip-top shape himself. He's been unusually busy lately. Saving you pretty near did him in. It'll be months before he'll be able to help anyone else. So Professor X is not back to tip-top condition, and the healer can't finish the job either, and that's going to create story potential a little later in this issue and issues beyond as well. So Callisto makes the point, you've got to give your body a decent chance to finish the job. That means taking things real easy, and any extraordinary physical or especially psychic exertion and your history. So then Professor X gets his first look at Morlock Alley. He's never seen it before. And Callisto explains that the main tunnel is buried a mile beneath the surface and runs the length of Manhattan, with branch lines out to Jersey, Staten Island, Long Island, and upstate. We've even got a terminus right by your property. So we'll see that pan out in future storylines, including Mutant Massacre in respect of that terminus at the Professor X's mansion. So the Professor asks how many Morlocks are there. Callisto won't give him an exact figure, and she offers to take him on the engine, the train engine, back to the X mansion. But then they're interrupted here by Sunder arriving with some dead Morlock children. And Callisto is enraged, and she says, "See, Xavier, see. That's the reality of a mutant's existence. Will always be targets, even babies who never did anyone any harm. I gave my word to Aurora. Morlocks will coexist with humanity in peace, but if they won't leave us alone, if they start hunting us, if they want a race war, then by all I hold holy, they'll get one." So Claremont ramping up the tension there in respect of the possibility of future storylines involving the Morlocks. And then we switch focus to the Rocky Mountains, just west of Colorado Springs, and we've got James Proudstar thinking back to his brother's death in that location. So he says here, "I remember when Xavier brought your body home." He's talking to his dead brother. "He told our parents that they should be proud of you, that you died bravely as an Apache should. I tried to take your place, John, but nothing I've done has made a difference. They breathe, they eat and move, but there's no more life in them. Grief has made them hollow. Shadow selves. Banshee could have spared them that. He could have saved you, but he didn't." And so here in Color Holes, we've got flashbacks to John aboard the plane where he was trying to stop Count Nefaria escaping, and Banshee unable to save Thunderbird from the exploding plane. So we see the silhouette of Banshee there in the color hold. And it's Xavier that James blames. It's Xavier, though, who lured you from your family with his snake's tongue and accursed side powers. I blame him for your death, and I mean to make him pay. And that's what this whole story is about. That's the driver of the plot here. But Thunderbird has some unexpected companions arrive, and they are his fellow Hellion members, Roulette and Empath. And he hasn't asked them along and doesn't want them there, but they insist that they're there to help. And Empath says, "Sorry, Thunderbird, even you are not stupid enough to believe you can deal with the X-Men by yourself." And he retorts, "What I believe, Spaniard, and choose to do about it are my concerns, no one else's." He says it's a personal matter between him and Xavier, and tells them not to interfere, but of course they do. And in this period, Empath has a relationship with Firestar, who herself is a mutant too, and he's using his emotional manipulation powers to make Firestar do his bidding. And Roulette here thinks to herself, what a drip. I gotta admit about Firestar, I gotta admit though, the boy is slick, she's putty in his hands, he's playing with her emotions, like my pop does his dice. Man, he ever tries that stunt with me though, I'll cut out his heart. So Firestar wants to do Empath's bidding, and that is to help Thunderbird against the evil X-Men. So she acquiesces to that, but it's because he's manipulating her emotionally. And then, speaking of the X-Men, our story switches to Professor Charles Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, and there is, in the Danger Room, a training in session. And the trainee is Cannonball of the New Mutants. And so the exercise is one of tag. And so we see the game unfold in the Danger Room, and we get to see the X-Men use their different powers in unison with each other and get the better of Cannonball and Colossus in the course of that training. And then they're interrupted by the arrival of Professor Xavier. So Callisto's brought him to the mansion, and he makes his way to his private quarters while everybody has a good laugh at the outrageous outfit he's wearing. And yeah, so that's pretty funny there. And let's continue here with an interesting little interlude with Storm. So where is Storm? So she is making her way to Africa, and she is thinking about her recent adventure when she was enchanted by Kulangath. And she thinks to herself here, when last I tried to leave New York, a demon sorcerer transformed the city and all its people into their ancient barbaric equivalents. An adventure none but I and a few others even remember. I found myself recast as a warrior princess and sorceress. Was that because before my powers were stolen from me, I was a mutant leader of the X-Men? Or is there some deeper meaning? And then she sees a vision of mountains like none she's ever seen before. And then behind her, she hears a voice and a ghostly figure grabs her arm. And it's her mother, Endare. But the mother fades. And she thinks to herself, I saw this apparition once before, but told myself it was an hallucination. Endare died when I was a child. If this is a true ghost, why have I never seen her before? I could be going mad, but I think not. Her appearance coincides with that of those strange mountains. They must be important to my life. Wherever they are, whatever it costs, I will find them, and I pray my destiny. And so that was something that Claremont was setting up for Storm, that she had an ancient ancestry through the mother line, matrilineal, going back to the dawn of the human race in East Africa, that she's descended from a line of white-haired, blue-eyed sorceresses. And her mother too, of course, then. Interesting that, but it never quite landed. His plans changed in respect of all of that. But then we're back to Xavier's school, and Professor X is having a long bath. And by the way, that's an interesting establishing shot of the front of the mansion. That's difficult to do, so John Romita Jr. Challenging himself with that one, and quite effective. So the professor's having a bath. It's interrupted. And he's thinking about the situation he finds himself in, and that like it or not, he's got no choice but to take a vacation. So that's Claremont setting things up to move Professor X out of the book, which will happen in the coming year. But he's interrupted by a phone call, and it's from Nightcrawler, and basically there's a situation. And the situation is that that the X-Men have discovered via Moira McTaggart that Banshee is missing, and also they've had contact from James Proudstar, Thunderbird's younger brother, as Professor X makes the point, and he has a message for them. X-Men, I've taken Banshee prisoner. In 24 hours, I plan to kill him. So here we go. And Nightcrawler confirms that Banshee's missing from Muir Island. That Thunderbird left a message, a fake message from Banshee, that he was leaving for a few days, but now it's confirmed that he has been taken by Thunderbird. And what he says is, I've hidden him somewhere inside Cheyenne Mountain. You want him? Come and get him. I'll be waiting. So Professor X gets it, that Thunderbird wants to have his revenge. And Wolverine sums up, to save our friend, we got to penetrate NORAD headquarters, one of the most heavily defended military installations in the world. You can bet the moment we show ourselves will trigger every alarm in the place. We'll be fighting the Air Force as well as the Indian. Even if we win and rescue Banshee, we'll still lose because our rep will be in the mud. This caper could make us outlaws, in fact as well as name. And that's interesting because that's the way that Claremont is moving the X-Men. He's been playing around recently with the idea that they're moving towards an outsider status as superheroes. And Wolverine's making the point, if this goes down the way he thinks it will, they could well be outlaws at the end of the caper, as he puts it. But anyway, they decide to go ahead because, as Wolverine makes the point, X-Men look after their own. So they've got a plan. Nightcrawler's leader in the absence of Storm and Cyclops. They sneak their way into Cheyenne Mountain, codenamed Valhalla. And when Kitty's in, she psychically calls out for the Professor. But of course, his powers now are weak on account of that beating he took and the unfinished healing via the Morlock healer. So he reaches out to Rachel to put him in a psychic link with the rest of the X-Men. And so this is like, Rachel is only new to the team, so she hasn't had enough time to really train with them, and she's untested, unproved. So Kitty's a little worried as to whether the Professor knows what he's doing, breaking Ray in on a new job. So then Nightcrawler teleports in, and he's teleporting in the other X-Men because Rachel is allowing him to see psychically where he's teleporting to, because Nightcrawler can't teleport anywhere unless he has been there or can see the location that he's teleporting to. So anyway, he's able to teleport them in, but it takes something out of him. And then back with the Professor, he's conflicted and a little bit unsure of his new position as team leader. And he says to the Professor, perhaps he's past his prime. And the Professor demurs and says, to quote Kitty, Nightcrawler, give me a break. And Nightcrawler doesn't want to leave the Professor alone, but the Professor says, our Blackbird aircraft is cloaked against all sensor scans, and should my psi powers fail, I'll have Lockheed to protect me. So Lockheed is snoozing there on one of the seats in the cockpit. So Nightcrawler teleports back to the rest of the X-Men, and the Professor thinks, thank heaven he's at last gone. It's such a relief to let myself look as awful as I feel. I would have told Nightcrawler of my disability, but this is his first major mission as the X-Men's field leader. He's enough to worry about without worrying about me. So then he uses Cerebro to amplify his thoughts to see if he can locate Banshee and communicate the location to the X-Men in the mountain. But then here comes the Hellions. First of all, Roulette, throwing in a black disc that disrupts the systems aboard the Blackbird, and the feedback hits Cerebro as well, which knocks the Professor out. And then Empath uses his powers to frighten Lockheed, who flies miles away, fleeing for his life before he realizes what's happened to him. And then he tries to use his powers on the Professor, but the Professor resists to a point, and then Empath hits the Professor with some nerve gas, I think. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she hits him with nerve gas. So she says it'll KO his psi powers for a full day. And then Rachel realizes on the other end of their psi link that the Professor's under attack, and she can't sense his thoughts, so he's unconscious. So Nightcrawler as leader sends Kitty back to check on the Professor, and she reveals that what's happened. So Nightcrawler is outraged. He says, I should have known, I should have anticipated. Kitty says not to blame himself, but he thinks it is his responsibility, and he compares himself adversely against Cyclops and Storm. But Wolverine is just pragmatic about things. You did what you did, it's done, you're still boss, what's our next move? So Nightcrawler's next move is to use Rachel to locate Banshee, but because of her trauma from the dystopian future that she lived in, where she was a hound and was forced to use her psi skills to hunt down mutants, she's not able to use her psi skill to locate Banshee. Now that's a bit of a stretch, but if we really do credit that she's badly traumatized by that experience, maybe it makes a little sense. But she shuts down anyway, so the X-Men have to work without her. And Kitty and Wolverine go on the hunt for Banshee. So working together, they make their way down through the complex to the basement. And of course, it's in the basement that they will ultimately find Banshee shackled. But then we're back at the Blackbird, and Nightcrawler and Rogue teleport there. Nightcrawler teleports back. He is in conversation here with Colossus, again comparing himself adversely to Cyclops and Storm. And Colossus makes a really good point here, Professor Xavier trusted you to assume their place. He would not have done so if he did not think you worthy. Besides, as I recall, both Aurora and Scott made their share of mistakes. All that is asked of any of us is our best. So that's a very good point from Colossus. Then we switch scene to the war room. We've got the Hellions here, incognito as members of a tourist party, getting a tour of the war room, and then they start to disrupt things using their powers. So Roulette here uses her power in order to allow the NORAD scanners to pick up on the X-Men, and Empath uses his power to make the General, his natural concern, into a full-blown panic. So he sounds a SecBot alert and sanctions the use of terminal force. So here's these security bots emerging to hunt down the X-Men. So in the confusion, Firestar also makes her way to fulfill her part of Empath and Roulette's plan. Roulette here says, I just love rattling people's chains. The crazier I make them, the better. So these two are, peas in a pod, a bad pair. And then we pick up with Wolverine and Shadowcat. They've located Banshee. Now he's unconscious, but he is alive, as Kitty sees. And then this is great. Wolverine's alert to Thunderbird in the shadows and punches him in the jaw. And now we get what we've been waiting for, a fight. And we get it between Thunderbird and Wolverine. So Wolverine blocks Thunderbird's punch there. He says to him, you're a good boy, maybe even better than your brother, but I'm the best. That's a great panel there. So Kitty phases Banshee out of the shackles and she leads him to safety. But the threat level is ramped up by the release of toxic gas. So Wolverine thinks a neurotoxin, a minute's exposure to that and we're history. So as I said, the threat level is ramped up. But in the meantime, in the middle of this page, we've got a great fight choreography here from John Romita Jr. and Dan Green. So what I really like about this is that Wolverine has grabbed Thunderbird by the wrists and he is using his knees against him. He's kneeing Thunderbird in the chest with his right knee and then in the jaw with his left. That's really well done. And then Kitty comes back to rescue Wolverine, but the chamber is filled up with the neurotoxin and she's knocked out. So Wolverine realizes they're in trouble. And it was an amateur move of Kitty to come back. And Thunderbird uses the distraction to punch Wolverine. And it's great here that we get the recognition that because of Wolverine's adamantium lace skeleton, it nearly breaks Thunderbird's fist. But it doesn't, and Thunderbird's making his escape. But he looks back and he's conflicted now. To avenge my brother, I swore the deaths of all the X-Men, so Xavier would suffer as my parents have before I finally took his life as well. All I have to do is seal this escape hatch and the deed is done. But I can't, he shouts. What's the matter with me? Why is my triumph turning to ashes? True, these are X-Men, but they had nothing to do with John's death. The girl wasn't even a member then. How can I slaughter an innocent? Doesn't honor demand it? I thought so, but I'm no longer sure. So he's morally conflicted, but he concludes that the one person he will get revenge on is the Professor, and he's going to go slay Johnny's murderer as he sees it, Charles Xavier. Meanwhile, the alarms are going off in the mountain, and that's noted by Colossus and Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler thinks that the alarms can't have anything to do with them, but he's dead wrong because they're smashes through the walls, the SecBots, and they've got that lethal sanction from the General. So now Nightcrawler and Colossus are in trouble. But Nightcrawler ports away for reinforcements and he comes back with Rogue. You would want Rogue there to handle these guys. But he's grabbed by this catch web. The more he struggles, the tighter it gets, and he can't concentrate enough to teleport out of the web. But Rogue launches Colossus as a fastball special against the SecBots, takes them out. Like what are they called again? Bowling pins. And then he swings one around to knock the others down as well, so it's pretty cool. fight choreography on these pages and in these panels by Romita Jr. and Dan Green. And then Rogue is wondering about Rachel. They need her, but she's shut down. And then we pick up with the arrival of Firestar, who grabs Colossus and flies him right out of the mountain using her powers to sear through rock as easily as air. And so she soon reaches open sky. And Nightcrawler's deposited in the catchweb before the general, who orders him to be executed. But some of his men protest. Sir, he's a prisoner, says one. But the general says, "It, Captain, is a mutie, an enemy of our race, kill it." But he's still under the control of Empath. And Empath uses his power on Nightcrawler to confirm that muties are enemies of the human race. So Nightcrawler, enraged, sent into a berserk rage with hatred because of Empath's manipulation, teleports out of the catchweb. So he was able to do that. He would have been able to do that. It's just he didn't believe in himself. And then he starts to go to town on the men around the general. Then we pick up with Colossus outside and Firestar, and he realizes that he's going to have to throttle her before they both die, because the X-Men are in danger, and he tries to reason with her, and she's not listening. She says that it has to be true that that the X-Men are not enemies. The man I love wouldn't lie, except I feel this wrong. This is wrong. So she's also got like a moral conscience that, you know, she's wrestling with in terms of a feeling that what's going against the X-Men is wrong. So Rogue comes out to lend assistance to Colossus. She grabs Firestar as well. And she realizes here Empath's responsible. He mucked with Firestar's emotions, making her believe she loved him. Turned her into his puppet, the creep. He better pray I never get my hands on him. So this Empath guy, he's got a comeuppance coming, and we'll see how that pans out. So here he is, speak of the devil, still manipulating in the war room, but Thunderbird grabs him, and he's enraged. He says, I told you not to interfere. I ought to rip out your black sadistic heart. You've ruined everything. Empath is grabbed by Kitty. She brings him down to Wolverine, who's waiting for him. You're Empath, right, kid? And this is a great scene here. Great 3 panels from Romita Jr. and Dan Green. Pay attention. You and I are going to have a little talk, says Wolverine. I know what you can do. You've been playing with people's heads all afternoon. I dare you to try it with me. Come on, do your worst. Who knows? It might work. You might have yourself another slave. But if it doesn't, snicked. And that's a great perspective on the 3 claws popping and that grin from Wolverine. You know he means business. And Empath just faints, and Wolverine concludes, like I figured, no guts. Tremendous scene, really great. So Nightcrawler grabs Roulette, and he's been shot at by the security guys in the war room, makes his way into a ventilation shaft. Thunderbird is watching the whole thing. Kitty Pryde tries to grab him and phase him through to the basement too, but he's wise to her, and so he gets free of her. Kitty drops down to Wolverine, says, missed him. Sorry, he was too darn fast. No sign of Nightcrawler. It's a great panel here with Wolverine. You know, he's so relaxed. He's got time to light up a cigarette and enjoy his cigarette while trying to figure out what to do next. So he says here, the only thing for us to do is slog and scrap our way to the finish and make sure we're among the survivors. But then these Secbots arrive into the basement, make it move muties, and we'll be glad to shoot you. So let's see. So now Rogue has decided that they need Rachel's side powers, and so she's going to forcibly take them from her. But before that can happen, Nightcrawler arrives, and he's got an alternative plan. He's just simply going to use Rachel to guide him with his teleportation to grab Wolverine and Kitty. And she says here, but the mental image I have of their location. It's so vague. If it's all we have, Liebchen, he says, but you don't need to accompany me. Just feed the image into my mind. If you're willing to take the risk, she says, then so am I. So now she has become courageous. And so they teleport, and Rogue concludes here, looks like there's hope for Red after all. She says Proudstar is still on the loose, and she'll go back to the Blackbird to cover the Professor. And speaking of whom, I'm back at the Blackbird. Thunderbird's arrived with his brother's knife, and Professor X is just coming to from the nerve gas. And of course he doesn't have access to his powers because of the nerve gas. So he says a psi scan would confirm how best to deal with Thunderbird, but he hasn't got that option. Instead, he's only got his instincts and intelligence to rely on. So he has to talk James down. And he says, I'm nothing to lose by fighting, James. Since whatever I do, you plan to take my life, isn't that so? And he says, yes. And the Professor says, praise indeed. Your brother set me a splendid example. Rarely have I seen so courageous a man. But James basically doesn't want him to speak his brother's name. And the Professor insists, I would have given anything to save him. I would have gladly died in his place. James is not convinced. He thinks they're just lousy words. He says that he had his whole life, his brother had his whole life ahead of him till you came along. And the Professor makes the point, it was his choice. James laughs and says, it's bull. You're a telepath. You can make a man believe anything, do anything. And of course, he hasn't got his side powers here. So it is only going to be the power of his speech that will work or not work on James Proudstar. If that is what you truly believe, James, then I have committed a grievous crime, and you must slay me for it. Such is no less than I deserve. You hold his blade, be true to your beliefs and your hate, avenge your brother's strike. But he insists he joined me of his own free will, James, and of that same free will, he chose the moment and manner of his death. So James insists that the Professor is lying, and here we come to the climax of this revenge story. Will he revenge himself for his brother's death? Then kill me, says the Professor. So he raises the knife high and drops it. And he falls to his knees and says, I failed my brother, myself. I'm no man, no Apache, only a craven coward. But the Professor demurs, not so, James, not so. And Rogue arrives just in time. Well, actually not in time. She arrives like the Professor doesn't need to be saved because he's talked James Proudstar out of taking the revenge that would have, lost him his soul. So he says to Rogue, leave him be. Listen to me, James, a coward, because you could not find within yourself the capacity to murder in cold blood, because you realized that to do so would not honor your brother's memory, but desecrate it. You've nothing to be ashamed of. Such self-knowledge does not come easily. To face and accept it takes the courage of a warrior born. Okay, and then it's over. So the X-Men are back in the mansion, and there's a news report which confirms that there is a federal manhunt for the mutants known as the Uncanny X-Men. So they're officially outlaws now. That was what Wolverine figured would be the outcome of the caper either way, and so it has come to pass. And Nightcrawler says it. You were right on that score, Wolverine. Our reputation as heroes is definitely past tense. So, we have the Hellions here as well. Firestar, and we also have James Proudstar there. And it turns out that they have Roulette and Empath knocked out upstairs. And Cannonball here is angry. Danny tells him to relax. Danny Moonstar, he says, I'm angry. Empath had no call doing that to Firestar. I swear, I ever see that turkey again, I'll rearrange his scummy face. Because Cannonball has got some feelings for Firestar, and they will have a relationship. So, Rogue has found Lockheed as well. So Kitty's delighted. And James asks the question, what will become of us? Nightcrawler says, you can go or stay as you wish. Are we not to be punished? Nightcrawler says, the Professor says no. If society forces us to become a law unto ourselves, then it will be tempered with mercy. And James says, well, if you don't mind, I'll take my teammates home to the Massachusetts Academy. Rachel's incredulous. Rogue too, now who's being brainwashed. But he says, it's where I belong, Rogue. I have true friends there, not like Empath and Roulette. I cannot abandon them, his true friends. I'm done with walking in my brother's footsteps. I must find my own path, my destiny, and for better or worse, the academy is where I must begin. And it's the same with Firestar as well. No one has been as kind to her after her father as Miss Frost. And she concludes she can't run out on Miss Frost. It's something Roulette or Empath would do. I don't want to be like them, she says. So the professor says he understands and there'll always be a place for her with the X-Men if she wants it. And James makes the point, you know, would it help if he turned himself into the feds? Maybe that would save the X-Men's reputation. And so the professor makes a fateful decision here. He says, nothing in Cheyenne Mountain was damaged that was not easily and immediately repaired. The nation was never in danger, James, and you have enough to cope with without adding a possible lifetime in prison to your burdens. Everyone deserves a second chance, even your teammates, sedated and sleeping upstairs to keep them out of mischief. This perhaps does not serve the law, but to my mind, it well serves justice. So we're getting a philosophical distinction here drawn between the law on the one hand, now the X-Men are outlaws, and justice, something different in some cases from the law. But the X-Men's conception of justice is one tempered by mercy. It's not all about retribution. There's also room for rehabilitation. And that's why the professor says to James, learn from your mistakes, lad, and be a better man, a more human being. For it. Therein lies the truest, most fitting memorial to your brother's sacrifice and the means to proving yourself worthy of his name. And James shakes his hand and says, I'll try, Professor, my very best. Just one question I have is, where is Banshee here? He's not present for this at all. And I think it would have been useful, or it would have been nice also, to have him here and maybe for there to be a kind of like a reconciliation and a shaking of hands between Banshee and James Proudstar as well, because that was what enraged him, blaming Banshee and Professor X for his brother's death. So that's just one little teeny criticism I have of this denouement, emotional denouement to the story. Then we get an epilogue, 2-page epilogue, our last couple of pages of the 40 pages of story. And this picks up with Jaime Rodriguez, the dock worker, warehouse worker, and they're listening to a newscast that is scaremongering about mutants. Jaime is disgusted at his brother-in-law for being prejudiced against mutants, and he says to his brother-in-law Louise, well, I ain't so sure anymore, I know you, Louise. And then his son comes out of his room, he tells him to go do the dishes, and Louise expresses some concern about the house guest of Jaime's, that he makes him nervous. You know what, Louise, he says, I could care less. I was taught to judge a man by what he does, not how he looks. Nimrod saved my life, that makes him good enough for me. And that's a reference to the end of X-Men 191, as Ann Nocenti points out. And here is Nimrod. So he's taken on a human form, but it's not fully humanoid, and he figures that his looks are getting him in a spot that could endanger his mission, and so he's going to have to work on refining his looks and blend more with the indigenous populace. And then he reveals that he was tracking Rachel Summers, but the unit moved cross time as well as down and resides on an Earth that is similar to, but not his own. So this is a different timeline, and he recognizes it. So here we get the conclusion of his thinking about what he should do in this new timeline. Nimrod's primary programming is to defend humanity. If this unit's origin time fulfillment required the extermination of mutant kind, in this unit's origin time fulfillment required the extermination of mutant kind, but does the same hold true here? If the operational parameters change, does that not also change the conclusion? And that's interesting that, you know, this artificial intelligence is thinking that maybe the extermination of mutant kind is not required in this new timeline. He concludes insufficient data for proper analysis. More is required before final decision. Then there's the newscast about the supervillain Juggernaut has been sighted in Lower Manhattan. Police SWAT teams are on the alert and the Avengers have been notified. Stay tuned for further details. So this feeds in to Nimrod's provisional decision as regards what he's going to do. This unit's duty is clear. Nimrod will locate and neutralize those anomalies labeled as outlaws. The Juggernaut, okay, and the Uncanny X-Men, they will be terminated. So the outcome of the X-Men being branded outlaws now has knock-on consequences, and one of them is that Nimrod is on their tail. And the issue as a whole is dedicated to Len Wein and Dave Cochran, who had the dream, and Tom Orzechowski and Glenn Swine, who've been with us from the very beginning. So letterer and colorist from the very beginning, from Giant Size X-Men #1 and Uncanny X-Men #94 on. So there you go. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on this double-sized Gala 100 anniversary issue. If you did, please like the video on YouTube, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.